Between 1998 and 2015, $21 trillion just vanished from the United States government ledgers.
Yeah, just completely disappeared.
Right. I mean, it didn't burn in a fire. It wasn't, accidentally misplaced in some massive bureaucratic rounding error.
No, absolutely not.
According to the deeply meticulously researched material we are examining today, that money actually funded the blueprint for a brand new operating system for humanity.
A completely new infrastructure, yeah.
Exactly. So, welcome to the deep dive. We are speaking directly to you today, the learner.
The person who really loves connecting the dots.
Right, the person who wants the overarching view of how the world actually functions without getting, completely bogged down in information overload.
Because it can get overwhelming.
It really can. So our mission for today's deep dive is to unpack a highly detailed, incredibly provocative theory regarding the architecture of global power.
We're looking specifically at the work and the conceptual frameworks of Catherine Austin Fitts.
Yes, exactly. Fitts' detailed analysis of what she calls the control grid and this multi-decade financial coup.
And I have to say, it is a staggering architectural blueprint we are looking at here.
It really is.
When you start mapping out the scale of the capital flows she's tracked,
The sheer amount of money.
right, you realize this isn't just about financial theory. It's about the fundamental restructuring of human society.
So here is the roadmap for our dive today. We are going to explore this overarching concept of a global syndicate that Fitts argues is actively transitioning the world toward a system of programmable money and digital IDs.
Which is a massive shift.
Huge. And we're going to analyze how current geopolitical events, specifically those seemingly chaotic conflicts in the Middle East, might actually be engineered mechanisms.
Engineered to squeeze global food and fertilizer supply chains, yeah.
Right. And finally, and I think most importantly, we aren't just going to sit in the dark analyzing a dystopia today.
No, we definitely don't want to leave you there.
We are going to explore what Fitts calls Plan B. We'll look at strategies for maintaining analog resilience, the mathematical power of cash, and how to build independent enterprise for the next generation.
But before we take that first step into the architecture of this grid, we really need to pause and establish the ground rules for this specific conversation.
Absolutely. We need to make a very clear, definitive statement to you, the listener.
Right up front.
Because the source material we are unpacking today contains highly politically charged content. I mean, it touches on both left-wing and right-wing figures.
From the Biden and Trump administrations to, well, global geopolitical leaders all over the map.
Yeah, so we want to be entirely explicit right now. We are impartially reporting on the content provided in these documents and interviews.
Impartially.
Yes, we're not endorsing the viewpoints, we're not endorsing the political claims or the sweeping theories of the content.
Right, we are simply mapping the territory.
We are presenting the ideas and the data contained in the original source material for your own analysis and critical thinking.
Because our role is really just to act as your guides through a very complex thesis.
Exactly.
And while this subject matter, which ranges from massive financial black holes to the concept of engineered global conflict, while it can seem incredibly dark, the ultimate destination of this deep dive is actually about empowerment.
Yes, exactly.
The back end of this discussion is entirely focused on practical, actionable solutions and local resilience.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's start with the foundation of her entire thesis.
The grid itself.
Right, the term control grid is used repeatedly in the material. And honestly, it sounds like something out of a cyberpunk novel.
It really does sound like sci-fi.
So how exactly does Fitts define this grid mechanically? Like, what are the actual components?
Well, what's fascinating here is that she doesn't describe it as some vague, shadowy, Illuminati-style concept.
Okay.
It's described as a highly specific three-part technological and financial infrastructure. Think of it as three essential baskets that must be built, funded, and integrated simultaneously.
Okay, three baskets. What's the first one?
The first basket is programmable money. Now, it's crucial to understand the distinction she makes here. This isn't just digital currency.
Because we already have digital currency, right?
Exactly. When you swipe your debit card or use Apple Pay, that's digital. But programmable money, like central bank digital currencies or CBDC.
Like CBDC?
Yeah, that involves smart contracts embedded into the currency itself.
Wait, I want to make sure I'm grasping the mechanics of that. You're saying it's not just a digital dollar. It's a dollar with a geographic fence or behavioral rule attached to its very code.
Precisely. Imagine receiving your paycheck, but the underlying code dictates that, say, 20% of it can only be spent on food.
Wow.
Or maybe another 10% expires if you don't spend it within 30 days, just to artificially stimulate the economy.
So the money just disappears from your wallet.
Yes. Or consider this. If your personal carbon footprint reaches a certain algorithmically determined limit, the money simply will not function at a gas pump.
Or to buy a plane ticket or something.
Right. The money itself enforces compliance.
But to enforce a rule on a specific person's money, the system has to know exactly who is holding that digital token at any given millisecond.
Exactly, which logically brings us to the second basket.
Digital ID.
Yes, digital ID. It is the mandatory zero-trust verification layer.
Because the money doesn't work without knowing who you are.
Right. If the money has conditional logic built into it, the overarching system needs to know with absolute biometric certainty who is attempting to execute a transaction.
To make sure those specific rules are applied to the correct individual.
You cannot have programmable money function on a societal scale without a comprehensive digital identity system, one that links your health records, your tax status, your criminal record, and your biometric data directly to your wallet.
That's terrifying. And the third basket, you have the money, you have the identity tracking, what completes the grid?
The physical hardware, software, and the private enforcement infrastructure.
The actual tangible stuff.
Exactly. This is the tangible reality of the grid. We are talking about the massive hyperscale data centers required to process billions of microtransactions and surveillance data points in real time.
So telecommunications networks, satellite arrays, all of that.
Yes. And crucially, Fitz points out that it requires specialized enforcement arms.
Oh, physical enforcement.
Right. The text specifically highlights entities like ICE immigration and customs enforcement and private prison contractors.
Interesting.
The argument is that you need physical detention centers and enforcement agencies that operate outside standard constitutional protections. They act as the physical muscle of this digital grid.
You know, I'm trying to visualize the sheer scale of what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
It sounds like she is describing an operating system not for a smartphone or a computer network, but an operating system for human behavior and global commerce.
That is exactly how Fitz conceptualizes it. It is an operating system for humanity.
That's just wild.
And building an infrastructure of that magnitude, rewiring the entire planetary financial system, it requires an incomprehensible amount of capital.
Right, you don't build that just with standard tax revenue.
No. And this is where her material introduces the concept of the financial coup.
The missing money.
Exactly. She lays out a staggering forensic accounting trail regarding money that has essentially been siphoned away from the public sphere and into the hands of an elite syndicate to fund the construction of this grid.
Let's get into the math on that, because the numbers she presents are almost too big for the human brain to process.
Oh.
We are talking about $55 trillion in total.
It's massive.
Walk us through how a sum that massive gets moved without the public realizing it.
Sure. So Fitz breaks this $55 trillion coup down into three distinct, historically documented phases.
Okay.
The first phase is the $21 trillion that went missing from U.S. government accounting ledgers between 1998 and 2015.
And this is primarily the DoD, right?
Yeah. Yes. The Department of Defense and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD.
Okay, I have to stop you there. $21 trillion doesn't just fall behind the couch at the Pentagon.
No, it doesn't.
How does that mathematically happen? How do you actually hide that much capital?
It happens through something called unsupported journal voucher adjustments.
Unsupported journal voucher adjustments. That sounds incredibly dry.
Which is by design. It's essentially bureaucratic speak for accounting plugs.
Plugs?
Yeah. When the military's books don't balance at the end of the year, they literally plug in fake numbers to force the ledgers to match.
You've got to be kidding me.
Fitz, who actually served as Assistant Secretary of Housing and Federal Housing Commissioner, started tracking these plugs.
Right, because she was on the inside.
Exactly. And the legality of hiding this money was ultimately codified by something called SAB Statement 56.
FAB 56. Okay, explain that.
This is a crucial piece of the puzzle. FSAB 56 allows government entities to keep their financial books secret and actually create off-the-books accounting if they claim it is necessary for national security.
Unbelievable. So they created a legal black hole. You just stamp national security on the ledger, And the public, the taxpayers, and even most of Congress just lose the right to know where the trillions went.
Exactly. It's legally sanctioned financial opacity.
Wow.
So that is the first 21 trillion. The second phase of the coup involves the $29 trillion in bailouts and liquidity injections engineered by the central banking system during and immediately following the great financial crisis of 2008.
Ah, right. The whole era of too big to fail.
Yes, where private banking losses were essentially nationalized.
Right. And what's the third phase?
Then comes the final, highly accelerated phase. Fitz calls this the going direct reset, and it totals roughly $5 trillion.
Going direct. What does that actually mean in a mechanical sense?
Well, the term originates from a plan presented by the BlackRock Investment Institute. This was at the Central Bankers Conference in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, in August 2019.
Wait, August 2019, that's months before the pandemic even hit.
Exactly. The central banks had realized they were hitting the limits of traditional monetary policy. Lowering interest rates just wasn't working anymore.
They were out of ammo.
Right. So the going direct plan was designed to bypass the traditional banking system entirely, instead of lending money to commercial banks and hoping they lend it out to businesses.
The trickle-down approach.
Yeah, instead of that, the central bankers, working with the federal government, decided to inject trillions of dollars directly into the accounts of massive corporations, asset managers, and individuals.
It's like bypassing a blown circuit breaker and wiring the power straight to the motherboard.
A perfect analogy. And Fitz argues that the pandemic lockdowns of 2020 provided the absolute perfect justification to execute this $5 trillion going direct reset.
Because everyone was in a panic.
Yes. While small businesses were forced to close their doors globally, massive, publicly traded corporations were kept open and flooded with this newly printed direct injection capital.
Right, which led to the greatest upward transfer of wealth in human history.
Exactly.
Okay, so all of that equals $55 trillion. But who is actually orchestrating this? You can't have a coup without conspirators.
Right. If we connect this to her broader framework, Fitz attributes this multi-decade consolidation of wealth and power to what she simply calls the syndicate.
The syndicate.
Yeah. Sometimes the material refers to it as the Epstein Syndicate, referencing the network of blackmail and control, or it connects it to legacy financial families like the Rothschilds and Rockefellers.
Okay.
But fundamentally, she defines the syndicate as the interlocking network of families, corporations, and individuals who manage the equity in and around the central banking system. They are the architects, and they operate way above the level of nation-states.
I hear that, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Yeah.
Look at the news. American politics, and really global politics, seems more fiercely, bitterly divided right now than at any point in modern history.
It definitely looks that way.
I mean, the left and the right act like they are in a blood feud. So how does this massive, globally coordinated control grid get built if everyone is constantly fighting and gridlocked?
This raises an essential question about the nature of political theater, and Fitz's material addresses it head-on.
Okay, how?
Her argument is that the intense partisan division you see on television is largely an illusion designed to distract the public. She describes the system in Washington as a uniparty effort.
A uniparty?
Yes. The underlying agenda building the control grid never changes, regardless of who is actually sitting in the Oval Office.
So you're saying the grid gets built no matter who wins the election?
Precisely. Fitz outlines how different administrations are utilized for different phases of the project.
Can you give an example?
Yeah. For example, she states that the current administration, the Biden administration, has been operating at breakneck speed since January 2025, to build the actual technological and legislative infrastructure of the grid.
Right.
But she argues that previous administrations, specifically the Trump administration, served a vital different purpose. They were put in place to market and sell the infrastructure to conservatives who would normally resist it.
Sell it how? Because, conservatives generally campaign on smaller government and less surveillance. How do you sell a digital panopticon to that demographic?
By packaging it inside an emergency that triggers their specific political anxieties.
Ah, right.
You can't just announce to a conservative base, hey, we are building a biometric surveillance state. They would revolt immediately.
Obviously.
So according to Fitz, you use political flashpoints as the Trojan horse. You highlight or engineer massive election fraud controversies. Or you showcase an absolute crisis of illegal immigration at the border.
And then what happens?
Suddenly, the very people who would naturally oppose government overreach are practically begging for it. They demand strict digital IDs to secure the voting booths.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They demand the massive expansion of ICE, the militarization of the border, and the construction of massive detention centers to handle the immigration crisis.
Wow, so the political crisis is just the sales pitch.
Exactly.
The outrage is weaponized to manufacture consent for the infrastructure. They end up demanding the very tools required to build the control grid.
It's an incredibly effective psychological operation. And to illustrate just how deep this disconnect between public legal governance and this hidden syndicate really goes, Fitz shares a very striking anecdote.
From when she was in government.
Yes, from her own time serving as a high-ranking official in Washington. She describes witnessing a cabinet secretary having an absolute meltdown, just screaming at a regional administrator.
Over what?
Well, this administrator was simply trying to implement a standard court order. He was just trying to follow the law.
And how did this cabinet secretary justify ignoring a court order?
The secretary exploded. He screamed at the administrator, "The law. I don't have to obey the law. I report to a higher moral authority."
Oh my God. A higher moral authority.
Fitz describes witnessing that outburst as an eyes-wide shut moment. It was a terrifying, unguarded glimpse into the reality that the people running the government do not believe they are bound by the Constitution or the judiciary.
That's chilling.
The degrees of separation between the hidden syndicate's agenda and public legal governance are entirely vanishing.
It's like the mask slipped for just a second, revealing who really pulls the levers.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have this massive, abstract financial grid being built, funded by a $55 trillion invisible coup. Here's where it gets really interesting. How does this digital and financial grid enforce its will in the physical analog world?
That's the key question.
Because ultimately, human beings need to eat, they need energy, they need physical goods. To control a system, you have to control its physical inputs.
And that brings us directly to the concept of choke points.
Choke points.
Fitz argues that you cannot understand the current, seemingly chaotic conflicts in the Middle East, specifically the ongoing crises around the Straits of Hormuz and the Red Sea, unless you look at them through the lens of this control grid.
Right, the Straits of Hormuz being arguably the most critical arterial choke point for global shipping and energy transport on the planet.
Right. Now, Fitz points out a glaring, almost absurd contradiction in current events. The U.S. military operates with a budget approaching $1 trillion a year.
It's massive.
And under the traditional Bretton Woods global model established after World War II, the absolute foundational job of the U.S. Navy is to protect global sea lanes and ensure free trade.
That guarantee of open maritime trade is the core backing of the U.S. dollar acting as the global reserve currency.
Exactly. The deal was always, we provide the security umbrella for the oceans, and in exchange, the world prices its goods and trades in our currency.
That is the social contract of the global economy.
Yet, right now, we are watching the most powerful navy in human history appear completely helpless to keep the Straits of Hormuz and the Red Sea open against a heavily sanctioned Iran and various proxy groups like the Houthis.
Who are using, relatively cheap drones and missiles.
Exactly. So Fitz poses a central, piercing question to you, the listener. Are we witnessing the most remarkable, historically unprecedented act of incompetence in U.S. military history? Or is this an intentional, coordinated desire to shut down the global economy?
Incompetence versus intent. When you look at the trillions spent on defense, incompetence is a very hard pill to swallow.
It really is.
But there is a detail in her analysis of this shipping crisis that completely shifted my perspective. It wasn't just the military that effectively shut down the straits. It was the financial sector.
Yes. The power didn't ultimately come from Washington. It came from the City of London.
Right. Lloyd's of London and their massive syndicates of reinsurance networks simply announced they were cutting off maritime insurance for ships traveling through that specific corridor.
Which is a death sentence for shipping.
Right. Because the reality of global logistics is that if a massive container ship or a tanker cannot secure insurance, it legally and financially cannot sail.
The ships stopped.
The financial sector simply pulled the plug on physical trade. But why? If they run the economy, what is the actual target of shutting down their own trade routes?
What's fascinating here, and what Fitz hones in on, is the timing of the shutdown. You have to look at the calendar to understand the weaponization of logistics.
Okay.
She points out that this critical insurance shutdown happened in March. March is spring.
Spring planting season in the northern hemisphere.
Yes.
The window where the entire year's agricultural output is decided.
Exactly. Now, consider a country like the Netherlands. It is a tiny country geographically, but it is an absolute powerhouse, acting as the second largest agricultural exporter in the world.
Okay, so they need inputs.
Right. The raw materials moving through the Straits of Hormuz and the Red Sea are absolutely critical inputs for European fertilizer factories. If those ships don't arrive, the fertilizer isn't produced.
Oh, wow. So this blockade isn't just about the price of a barrel of oil going up. It's a direct attack on the global food supply.
Yes. Fitz quotes a leading member of the New York Federal Reserve who moved to Goldman Sachs, who projected that the route could be shut down for 21 days due to the conflict.
21 days.
Now, in the financial sector, a 21-day delay is just a blip on a quarterly earnings report.
Sure.
But in agriculture, a 21-day delay on receiving your fertilizer inputs during the critical spring window means you miss the planting season entirely.
Oh, man. The biological clock doesn't wait for supply chains to sort themselves out.
The window just closes, nature moves on. She shared a devastating anecdote about a farmer in Iowa that grounds this macro geopolitics into harsh reality.
What happened with the farmer?
This farmer was looking at a sudden 70% increase in fertilizer prices because of these engineered supply chain disruptions.
70%.
And his response wasn't just to complain to his local representative. He sat down, did the math, and said, I'm not going to plant. Because if his primary input cost is up 70%, putting seeds in the ground guarantees a massive financial loss. It is economically safer for him to let his fields sit barren.
And if the fields in the American Midwest and the fields in Europe sit barren, the world doesn't eat.
Exactly. And Fitz draws a very direct, chilling line between this current agricultural crisis and the pandemic, referring to this phase as COVID 2.0.
COVID 2.0.
Think back to what actually happened structurally during the 2020 lockdowns. We saw a massive consolidation of wealth.
Right.
Independent mom-and-pop small businesses were forcibly destroyed, while massive publicly traded syndicate-owned corporations like Amazon and Walmart thrived.
And she argues that this geopolitical shipping crisis is doing the exact same thing.
Yes, but this time they are consolidating the global food system.
It's a hostile takeover of the basic necessities of human survival. You bankrupt the independent farmers so corporate conglomerates can buy the land for pennies on the dollar.
Precisely. By intentionally squeezing the fertilizer supply and driving up costs, you predictably create the conditions for severe food shortages, even famine.
That's terrifying.
And Fitz notes the very disturbing parallel trend happening simultaneously in Washington. The U.S. administration has been systematically slashing domestic federal funds meant to support food emergencies.
Wait, really?
Yes. Furthermore, they have been cutting USAID funds that are traditionally meant to protect developing nations during famines.
So the strategy is to engineer a shortage through geopolitical choke points while simultaneously cutting the safety nets that would help people survive it. It's a pincer movement.
It is. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture of the control grid, the logic becomes grimly apparent.
How so?
Creating a desperate, starving, financially ruined populace makes people infinitely easier to herd into a digital control grid.
Because they need help.
Exactly.
Mhm.
History shows us that when people are hungry and desperate, they will readily accept programmable money, they will line up for digital IDs, and they will submit to biometric surveillance if that compliance is the only way they can access government food rations or universal basic income.
Wow. Hunger is the ultimate tool for manufacturing compliance.
Yes.
I follow the logic of consolidating control,
Mhm.
but this is where I have to admit I struggle to understand the end game. Controlling the food supply is an incredibly powerful weapon.
Absolutely.
But why squeeze the global population this hard?
Mm-hmm.
What is the actual benefit to this syndicate of deliberately impoverishing the populace and risking the destruction of their own global economy?
Yeah.
A parasite still needs a healthy host to survive, right?
Well, this raises what is arguably the most controversial and darkest element of Fick's analysis.
Okay, lay it on me.
Her assertion is that the syndicate's economic model has fundamentally changed due to technological advancements. Because of artificial intelligence, robotics, and automation, they no longer need a massive global labor force.
Oh.
Therefore, a technocratic control grid is simply easier and cheaper to manage with a significantly smaller population.
You're saying depopulation isn't a byproduct of their greed, it is a core structural goal.
Yes. And Fitz points to very specific quiet legislative battles happening right now to support this theory. She isn't just speaking abstractly.
What kind of legislative battles?
For example, she discusses how Bayer, the massive pharmaceutical and agricultural conglomerate that purchased Monsanto, is lobbying heavily, spending millions at both the federal and state legislative levels to secure permanent pesticide liability shields.
Explain how a liability shield works mechanically. What does that actually mean for the public?
It means they are aggressively lobbying for laws that would grant them absolute legal immunity from being sued for the health damage their agricultural chemicals cause.
Absolute immunity.
Yes, if these shields pass, citizens who develop cancers, neurological issues, or reproductive problems from exposure to these specific pesticides will have zero legal recourse. The corporations simply cannot be taken to court.
So they can continue to saturate the food supply with toxic compounds without any financial risk to their bottom line.
Exactly. And Fitz relays a very stark warning from a prominent, highly credentialed biotoxicologist who has been actively testifying before legislatures to stop these bills.
What did the scientists say?
This scientist stated on the record that if these liability protections pass, allowing these specific endocrine-disrupting chemicals to remain unchecked in the environment, the ongoing compounding damage to human fertility will result in an extinction-level event.
Extinction level. That isn't hyperbole. That is a scientific assessment of the trajectory of human reproduction.
Right. And Fitt's conclusion is that this trajectory is not an accident of corporate negligence. Given the extraordinary amount of top-down money, the coordinated political pressure, and the syndicate support pushing for these liability shields, she concludes this poisoning of the biosphere is an intentional mechanism of population reduction.
You know, it reminds me of that incredibly chilling quote from the source material regarding Jared Kushner.
Oh, yes.
Fitz mentions an interview he gave after leaving the Trump administration, where he was discussing the massive capital investments being made into life sciences and biotechnology.
Right, the immortality push.
Yeah. He basically said, quite casually, I'm going to be the last generation to not live forever or the first generation to live forever.
The pursuit of elite immortality.
And when you pair that quote with the reality of finite global resources, the dark logic of the syndicate is inescapable.
How do you mean?
If this elite class actually believes they are on the technological cusp of radical life extension, perhaps even living forever, they simply cannot afford for 8 billion other people to continue consuming the Earth's water, land, and food.
The math of immortality requires a smaller numerator.
Exactly.
If you're going to live forever, you view the rest of humanity not as fellow citizens, but as an invasive species using up your resources.
Which is horrifying.
It is. And this zero-sum resource mentality ties directly into how Fitz views the massive shifting geopolitical landscape. While the mainstream news portrays a fragmented, chaotic world constantly on the brink of World War III, Fitz suggests a completely different underlying reality.
A unified reality.
Yes. She sees a coordinated move away from the traditional Western-dominated G7 power structure toward what she calls the C45.
The C45 being a new coalition that includes the U.S., Russia, China, India, and a few dozen other strategic nations.
Exactly. And despite the public rhetoric of a new Cold War between Washington, Moscow, and Beijing, she argues that at the highest echelons of the syndicate, these nations are actually moving in lockstep toward a unified global technocracy. They are just dividing up the management zones.
I think the analogy Fitz uses for this is brilliant. She says it's not a world war, it is a massive global real estate transaction.
Right, like a game of Monopoly.
Exactly. It's as if the world is a giant Monopoly board and the players aren't trying to destroy the board, they're just aggressively trading properties.
Explain how she sees that transaction playing out geographically. What does the map look like?
Well, she points out the very telling detail that the key power brokers and negotiators for the U.S., Russia, and China over the last several years haven't been traditional career diplomats.
Yeah.
They have been literal, high-level real estate developers.
Fascinating.
She compares what they're doing to a massive 1031 swap applied to continents.
For listeners who might not be in real estate, we should probably explain the mechanics of a 1031 swap.
Go for it.
It's a specific U.S. tax code provision where an investor can exchange one investment property for another like-kind property, completely deferring all capital gains taxes. It allows you to shift your assets and consolidate your portfolio without taking a financial hit.
Right. So Fitz is taking that financial mechanism and applying it to geopolitics. America is essentially securing the Americas, establishing a modern Monroe Doctrine that extends from the Arctic resources of Greenland
Oh.
all the way down to the tip of South America and Antarctica. Well, China, through these quiet geopolitical swaps, is given uncontested domain over the South China Sea, which eventually includes the absorption of Taiwan. Russia secures this sphere in Eurasia.
And what about Europe?
Well, that's the thing. Europe, the traditional G7 allies. According to this theory, Europe is being deliberately left out in the cold as the sacrificial lamb of the transaction. Their economies are being intentionally deindustrialized and shut down by things like the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage and the Straits of Hormuz blockades we discussed earlier.
It is a terrifyingly clean, sociopathic way to look at global chaos. It strips away the emotional theater of war and replaces it with the cold calculus of an asset reorganization.
Okay, but let's bring this massive, abstract global scale down to the intensely personal level.
Good idea.
Because if this control grid is so powerful, armed with $55 trillion, engineered famines, and global real estate swaps, how does it deal with individual human beings? If someone figures this out and tries to resist, how does the syndicate actually target them?
Fitz speaks from direct, incredibly painful personal experience on this front. After she left her position in the government and began exposing financial irregularities, she spent 11 years locked in litigation against the Department of Justice.
11 years fighting the unlimited resources of the federal government.
Yes. She calculated that it took her and her team 36,000 hours of unpaid legal work just to survive the onslaught.
36,000 hours. That's a lifetime.
And what she emphasizes is a crucial lesson for anyone trying to understand modern tyranny. The deep state or the technocracy rarely uses overt Hollywood-style violence to silence dissent.
Right, they don't want martyrs.
Exactly. They don't usually send a SWAT team to kick your door down in the middle of the night because that creates martyrs and generates bad PR. Instead, they use quiet, invisible bureaucratic sabotage. They use the crushing weight of logistics, endless audits, and paperwork to slowly drain your life force.
The story she shared about the injection draw document perfectly illustrates this strategy. It is absolutely wild.
Oh, the magazine story. Yes, tell that one.
So Fitz and her team print 3,000 physical magazines in Europe. The content is meant to warn people about the dangers and the financial fraud surrounding certain health injections. Because they know they are being monitored, they take extreme precautions.
So we're very careful.
They specifically instruct the European printer, do not use a middleman or a third-party courier. Hand these pallets directly to NL Post, the national mail carrier. It needs to ship immediately to our subscribers.
And what happens when you try to move physical information outside the digital grid?
Silence.
Yeah.
3 entire months go by, and not a single one of those 3,000 individually addressed, fully paid for magazines arrives anywhere in the world. They just vanish into the ether.
So what does she do?
Well, Fitz finally concedes defeat. She assumes they were destroyed. She spends another 21,000 euros out of her own pocket to reprint the entire massive batch and ship them again.
Wow.
And guess what happens next? 4 days after the second batch finally starts hitting subscribers' desks, the full batch magically starts arriving in mailboxes.
Because the first batch was never actually lost in transit.
Exactly. Through tracking, they discovered the entire first shipment of 3,000 magazines had been secretly grabbed by authorities, moved to a secure warehouse in Hamburg, Germany, and held under literal lock and key for exactly 3 months.
Unbelievable.
They didn't burn them, they just delayed them until Fitz was forced to spend the extra 21,000 euros to reprint. Once she bled the capital, the original magazines were released.
What's deeply fascinating here is the psychological warfare goal behind this kind of technocratic sabotage. As you said, it's not about destroying you in one dramatic, illegal blow. It's about inflicting 1,000 invisible paper cuts.
Yes, death by 1,000 paper cuts.
It is designed to constantly drain the energy, the time, the focus, and the financial resources of small business owners and dissidents. Fitz talks poignantly about the immense struggle to just maintain their state of amusement.
And maintain their state of amusement.
Yeah, the emotional labor required to keep her team's morale up and keep them laughing when you are dealing with that level of invisible, soul-crushing logistical friction day after day after day.
It's death by 1,000 bureaucratic delays. But that leads to the obvious question, how do they legally trap the rest of us? If they use logistics against active dissidents like Fitz, what is the trap designed to snare the average, everyday person into this financial control grid?
The trap is hidden in plain sight, right inside the fine print we all ignore.
Oh, no.
Fitz details a truly incredible story of simply trying to set up what should be an old-school Straightforward analog financial service for her business. She and her lawyers spent 3 months negotiating the contract, going back and forth with the institution.
Okay.
During this process, they were presented with four entirely different, evolving sets of terms and conditions.
And we all know exactly how the modern world works.
Mm.
Nobody reads the terms and conditions. You just scroll to the bottom, check the box, and click accept so you can get on with your day.
Exactly, and the syndicate counts on that behavioral fatigue. But Fitz and her general counsel actually sat down and read every single word.
Good for them.
The final documentation presented to them was 134 pages long, printed in tiny, dense legal typography. And finally, buried on pages 133 and 134 of the fourth version of the contract, they found the bear trap.
What was the specific mechanism of the trap? How did the language read?
It was a seemingly innocuous clause that, upon legal review, would grant the financial institution the absolute right to reach into Fitz's bank account and seize all deposits. They could completely drain the account of every cent.
Just like that.
And the chilling part was the lack of due process. They could do this without a court order, without presenting any evidence, and without providing any documentation to the account holder.
That's literal theft.
The contract stipulated they could freeze and hold the money for 6 months based purely on the institution's internal, unchecked claim that the account holder had violated transparency laws in any of 135 different countries.
Wait, pause. Any of 135 countries.
Yes.
You would need a multi-million-dollar team of international corporate lawyers working round the clock just to know if you were fully compliant with the transparency laws of 135 different sovereign nations. It's a mathematically impossible standard of compliance.
Precisely. And that is the point. It is an intentionally impossible standard designed to give the financial institution absolute, unchallengeable permission to seize your assets whenever they desire. It is a legal blank check for theft.
So what does this all mean for the listener? It means that engaging blindly with modern digital financial products, just clicking accept to get the immediate convenience of a new app or a new digital wallet, is essentially signing away your fundamental property rights.
Yes, you are.
You are opting into the control grid voluntarily, legally waiving your right to due process.
You are handing them the keys to your economic survival. And I know mapping out this architecture, the $55 trillion financial coup, the engineered supply chain choke points, the weaponized agriculture, the 134-page legal traps, it paints a very bleak, overwhelming picture of the future.
I know it does. It feels really heavy. But at the start of this dive, we promised to pivot. And it is time to shift the energy of this conversation entirely.
Yes, let's talk about Plan B.
We've mapped the grid, we've analyzed the traps, we understand how the syndicate operates. Now let's talk about the resistance. Let's talk about Fitz's Plan B. Because despite everything we just discussed, Fitz does not believe this syndicate will actually succeed in the long run, does she?
No, she doesn't. And her optimism is grounded in cold, hard analysis. Fitz emphatically states that she believes the control grid will ultimately collapse under its own weight.
Really?
Her reasoning is crucial for us to understand. This entire crisis isn't actually a financial problem. It is fundamentally a governance problem.
A governance.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot solve a crisis of profoundly corrupt governance simply by introducing a new currency system. Even if you introduce a decentralized, mathematically pure currency like Bitcoin, if the fundamental structures of power, the courts, the legislatures, the military remain unchanged and deeply corrupt, the system will still fail. Technology cannot fix a moral rot.
Right. A new app won't save you if the judge is bought. And speaking of how currency actually interacts with local communities, I really want to bring up the tapeworm analogy from Fitz's material.
That's a great one.
It is one of the most brilliant, accessible ways to illustrate exactly why the digital financial system is so economically toxic to our hometowns.
It's a very powerful, visceral, visual model of economic extraction. Break the math down for the listener.
Okay, imagine you go to a local farmer's market in your town and you spend a €100 physical paper bill to buy vegetables.
Yep.
That farmer takes your €100 in cash and goes down the street to buy supplies from the local hardware store. The hardware store owner takes that exact same €100 bill and pays the local plumber to fix a leak.
It keeps moving.
Exactly. After 1,000 transactions, that single €100 bill is still circulating in your town. The local community still possesses €100 of actual usable wealth. It is a closed loop of prosperity.
But what happens digitally?
But what happens if you do that digitally?
Yeah.
If you swipe a debit card or tap your smartphone to buy those vegetables, with every single transaction, the banking cartel and the credit card processing companies take a 2 or 3% fee. They skim off the top.
Right.
So after 1,000 digital transactions, the entire 100 euros has been completely eaten by financial intermediaries. The wealth is methodically extracted from the local community and funneled up to the syndicates' data centers. The digital system is a tapeworm, slowly starving the host community to death.
And this mathematical reality is exactly why Fitz argues fiercely for a resurgence of physical cash.
We need cash.
And what is encouraging is that the macroeconomic data actually supports that this trend is reversing globally. For years, the relentless propaganda push was moving us toward a completely cashless society, sold under the guise of hygiene and convenience.
Right, especially during 2020.
But look at Scandinavia right now. Central banks in countries like Sweden, such as the Riksbank, which were once the global cheerleaders for killing cash, are now openly, publicly reversing course.
Right, really?
They are publishing white papers admitting that due to the rising threats of cyber warfare, natural disasters, and the inherent vulnerabilities of telecommunications grids, a purely electronic financial system is simply too fragile to survive.
We saw the exact same realization play out in real time in New Zealand recently.
Yes, during the massive cyclones that devastated their infrastructure, the cell towers went down, the power grid failed, and instantly millions of digital dollars became utterly useless.
People couldn't buy anything.
The governor of the Reserve Bank of New Zealand had to openly admit to the press that if the population hadn't had access to physical cash to buy food, water, and fuel, their entire societal infrastructure would have descended into total systemic collapse within days. Cash is the ultimate decentralized failsafe.
But there is a wild, almost maddening irony happening with this realization, right? Look at the situation in the Netherlands that Fitz points out.
Oh, the Dutch paradox.
The Dutch government is actively publishing brochures advising its citizens to make sure they keep physical cash stored at home in case of emergency grid failures or cyber attacks.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yet simultaneously, that exact same government has implemented a strict €3,000 per month legal limit on cash transactions.
It's hypocritical.
So they are essentially telling their citizens, we acknowledge that cash is essential for your basic survival, but we are going to make it illegal for you to use it in any meaningful economic capacity because we refuse to give up our ability to track and surveil your behavior.
It's a blatant demonstration that the war on cash was never about public convenience or stopping crime. It was always about establishing absolute behavioral control.
Exactly.
But Fitz is very pragmatic when she outlines her solutions. A successful Plan B future isn't about becoming a Luddite. It isn't about smashing all our smartphones, burning our laptops, and moving to a cabin in the woods to live in the Stone Age.
Right.
It's about achieving a careful, deliberate, boundaries-based balance of analog and digital tools.
Right. You don't have to live in a cave, but you also don't have to allow the syndicate to track your location and your spending habits 24/7. Fitz mentions a very practical tool she uses, a Faraday bag.
Yes. For those looking for immediate actionable steps, a Faraday bag is a simple pouch woven with metallic conductive materials that completely blocks all incoming and outgoing electromagnetic and wireless signals. Cellular Wi-Fi, GPS, Bluetooth.
It blocks everything.
Fitz explains that she simply drops her smartphone into one when she is traveling or having a private meeting. By dropping the phone in a Faraday bag to kill the wireless signals, you're essentially creating a localized digital black hole.
You control the tech, it doesn't control you.
You use the technology on your own terms when you actively need it, and when you are done, you put it in the bag to prevent the control grid from constantly pinging your location and harvesting your data. It's an analog boundary against digital intrusion.
It's about maintaining sovereignty over your own data at your physical location. And that concept of sovereignty extends heavily to wealth preservation as well. Fitz briefly, but firmly, touches on the vital difference between holding digital gold and holding actual physical gold.
That distinction is paramount in her framework. She warns that state-sponsored digital gold or gold-backed crypto tokens issued by central banks are just another programmable trap waiting to be sprung.
Because it's still digital.
It's still a digital entry on a centralized ledger that can be turned off with a keystroke. Holding physical gold or silver in your own possession is entirely different. Physical assets represent sovereign wealth that exists completely outside the banking system.
Right.
A gold coin in your safe cannot be frozen by an algorithmic update. And it cannot be seized because you violated a transparency clause buried on page 134 of a digital terms of service agreement.
Sovereignty requires physical custody. But surviving the grid isn't just about protecting your savings account. It's about physical sustenance and ultimately fostering the next generation so they don't inherit a digital prison.
Yes. This is where Fitz's deep dive gets incredibly grounded in the soil. Because what is the point of preserving your wealth with gold and cash if you can't secure clean, non-toxic food to feed your family?
Exactly. Fitz points out the absolute dystopian absurdity of the current governance system's priorities regarding food production. There is a meme circulating that she references, which captures the reality perfectly.
What's the meme?
The U.S. government has executed more armed SWAT raids on independent Amish raw milk farmers than they have on clients from Jeffrey Epstein's flight logs.
That is an incredibly dark metric, but it tells you absolutely everything you need to know about what the syndicate truly fears.
They don't fear pundits.
No, they do not fear political pundits on television. They fear independent, decentralized, localized health and sustenance. If you can feed yourself and your community without relying on their corporate supply chains, you cannot be controlled.
Fitz shares a beautiful, profoundly simple anecdote about a local farmer in her area that acts as the perfect counterimage to the control grid.
Tell us about the farmer.
This farmer simply has a refrigerator full of fresh milk sitting out front, and next to it, a simple open bowl for cash. You walk up, you take the milk you need, and you leave the paper money in the bowl.
Just an honor system.
When someone asks this farmer if he ever worries about his neighbors coming by and stealing cash from the bowl, the farmer just laughed. He said his neighbors steal far less from that open bowl than the credit card companies and the banks would steal from him in digital processing fees.
The tapeworm. He completely cut the financial tapeworm out of his life through the mechanism of local trust.
Exactly.
That milk bowl isn't just a quaint, rustic transaction. It is an act of profound, calculated economic rebellion against a $55 trillion system. It proves that human trust is a more efficient currency than algorithmic surveillance.
It really does.
But Fitz is clear that the ultimate plan B, the primary engine that will actually ensure this control grid fails long-term, is an initiative she started called the Young Builders Program. Can you explain the genesis of that project?
Yeah, this is perhaps the most inspiring and actionable part of her entire thesis. Fitz describes hearing from countless parents who are waking up and becoming absolutely furious.
Furious about what?
They are looking at the traditional paths of success and refusing to participate. They are refusing to pay $250,000 to send their children to prestigious Ivy League universities, only to have those legacy institutions destroy their children's minds with ideological programming, historical lies, and compliance training that assimilates them into the syndicate's worldview.
Why pay a fortune to have your child trained to be a compliant middle manager for the very system trying to enslave them?
Exactly. So Fitz and her team decided to build a parallel track. They started a prototype program called the Young Builders. The explicit goal is to take young minds and teach them how to build independent enterprise, how to create actual tangible wealth, and how to adopt a culture of success, excellence, and critical thinking.
Without wasting their formative years trapped inside corrupt, captured institutions.
Right. They put out a very quiet call for the pilot program with zero marketing budget, just reaching out to their existing network of like-minded individuals. They received 89 organic, highly detailed applications and ultimately chose 29 remarkable youths from all over the world.
Where were they from?
From India, Switzerland, the United States, and Canada. The target demographic was ages 18 to 28, but the applicant pool was so impressive they even accepted one brilliant 13-year-old who joined the curriculum alongside his mother.
And Fitz highlights that the results of removing these kids from the traditional indoctrination pipeline are already tangible and beautiful. There was a specific success story she shared about a young man named Maverick Moretti.
Yes, a 24-year-old classical organ composer.
Now, under the normal system, a talented musician might be told to get a corporate job to pay off student debt, or maybe they get assimilated into producing generic, algorithm-friendly jingles for commercials.
Right.
But through the Young Builders' ethos of independent enterprise and cultural creation, Moretti took a different path.
He published 24 original preludes based on the foundational works of Bach, but he infused them with this incredibly lighter, vibrant, younger energy. And because he understands independent enterprise, he isn't sitting in a cubicle doing data entry for a mega corporation to survive.
No, he's actually living.
He is actively traveling, performing, and rejuvenating classical organs in historic churches around the world. He is actively creating culture, beauty, and history on his own terms.
If we connect this story to the macro picture we started with, Fitz synthesizes the ultimate lesson perfectly. The single greatest, most tragic waste of capital in the world right now isn't the 21 trillion missing from the Pentagon. It is the wasting of young people's time and potential in captured institutions.
Yes.
Building a great civilization, or more accurately, rebuilding a free civilization after a multi-decade financial coup, doesn't happen from the top down. It happens organically from the ground up, one child at a time. You teach them to navigate this reality, to see the grid for what it is, and to build parallel systems without being spiritually or financially destroyed by it.
That is such a powerful, necessary place to land this conversation. Thank you for helping navigate this incredibly dense, challenging, and frankly terrifying, but ultimately deeply hopeful map of the current global landscape.
It was a journey for sure.
We have covered a massive amount of conceptual and historical ground today. We journeyed from the staggering, almost incomprehensible reality of a $55 trillion financial coup hidden in government ledgers to the realization that distant geopolitical crises in the Straits of Hormuz might actually be targeted, engineered attacks on your local farmer's fertilizer supply.
Yeah.
We dug into the insidious, invisible 134-page financial traps designed to quietly strip away your property rights. And we found our way out through the liberating mathematical power of a cash-based milk bowl and the inspiring civilization-building potential of the young builders.
And this brings us directly back to you, the listener. It is incredibly easy to look at the sheer scale of Fitz analysis, the trillions of dollars, the hyperscale data centers, the global real estate swaps, the biochemical lobbying, and feel entirely paralyzed and overwhelmed.
It's natural to feel that way.
But the core takeaway from her work is that the antidote to a massive, complex, hyper-digital control grid is remarkably simple. It is local, it is analog, it is physical cash exchanged in a bowl of trust among neighbors.
It is the friction they cannot algorithmically control. Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over, building on everything we've explored today.
What's that?
If the architects of this control grid truly need absolute 100% digital participation to make their system work, if their programmable money only functions when every single transaction is tracked and every ID is verified, it means they are uniquely, structurally vulnerable to the one thing technology can never fully account for: human friction. It makes you wonder, if we apply the same rigorous, deliberate organization they use for their digital panopticon toward building our own local, analog, trust-based networks, could the very blueprint of their control system accidentally become the exact instruction manual we use to make ourselves entirely ungovernable?